Hey, everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling a research paper, and I got to say the title is a little bit of a mouthful.
It is quite a mouthful.
It's called The Effect of Flipped Realistic Mathematics Education on Students' Achievement, Mathematics, Self-Efficacy, and Critical Thinking Tendency.
Yeah.
But don't worry, the ideas inside are actually way more interesting than that title might suggest. So
Much more digestible.
yeah, much more digestible, exactly. So basically, this study is looking at what happens when you take this thing called a flipped classroom and you combine it with a teaching method called realistic mathematics education.
Right.
Does it actually change how students learn and maybe even more importantly, how they feel about math?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and that's really what they're trying to get at in this paper.
Yeah, because I think we can all agree that the words math class, for a lot of people, yet don't exactly bring back those warm and fuzzy feelings.
No, not for a lot of people.
So let's break down some of these educational buzzwords, and we'll start with flipped classroom.
Okay, so flipped classroom, what does that even mean? So imagine, instead of like sitting in class and listening to a lecture, you watch a video at home.
Okay.
Right. You get kind of a sneak peek of the concept before you even step foot in the classroom.
Uh-huh.
And then class time becomes all about working on problems and having discussions.
Oh, so it's like turning class time into like a workshop
Yeah, exactly.
instead of just a lecture.
A workshop instead of a lecture. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and so I guess the idea is that by like engaging with the material beforehand, then students are coming to class ready to like participate and ask questions and really dig into the why behind the math.
Exactly, and they've had a chance to kind of process it at their own pace.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
So they can rewind the video if they need to. They can
Yeah.
take their time and then come to class ready to go.
Yeah, okay, I like that. All right, so then what about this realistic mathematics education, or RME?
Yeah.
What is that all about?
So think about trying to learn fractions,
Okay.
but you're just staring at a bunch of numbers and symbols on a page.
Yeah.
It's not super relatable or exciting.
No, it's not.
So RME is all about grounding math in real-world situations,
Okay.
making it feel relevant to students' lives.
So instead of just kind of manipulating numbers in a vacuum, they're actually using math to solve problems that could come up in their lives.
Yeah, exactly, and to make sense of the world around them.
Okay, that sounds a lot more engaging than my old math classes, I gotta say.
For sure, yeah.
So for instance, this study used a speeding ticket scenario to teach the mean value theorem.
Oh, wow.
So all of a sudden, this abstract calculus concept becomes something that you can actually visualize and connect to
Totally.
a real-world experience.
Yeah, it makes it way more relatable, and students can kind of grasp the concept more easily, I think.
Right, and I can just picture the students debating, the finer points of speeding and calculus all,
Exactly.
in a really lively classroom discussion.
Exactly, and actually understanding it and caring about it.
Yes, and caring about it.
Yeah,
Oh, man, I wish my math classes had been that interesting.
I know, me too. So, but it gets even more interesting because this study wasn't done in the typical research setting like the US or China.
Oh, really?
It was done in Ethiopia.
Wow, okay, so a developing
It's
country.
a developing country, yeah.
So they're taking these cutting-edge teaching methods and seeing if they can work in a totally different context.
Exactly, and I think that's what's so cool about this study is it's kind of pushing the boundaries of where we typically see this kind of research and seeing if it can be effective in different settings.
Right, and it makes you wonder, could these approaches be effective across diverse educational settings,
Totally, yeah. It's a really important question.
all over the world?
Yeah.
All right, well, enough of the buildup. Let's get to the good stuff.
Okay.
What did the researchers actually find? Did this flipped RME approach actually live up to all the hype?
All right, so here's the headline. Both the traditional RME and the flipped RME led to improvements in students' math achievement.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. The flipped RME group showed significantly higher achievement.
Wait, hold on. So even though both groups improved the students who got to experience that flipped classroom with those real-world problems, they actually did way better.
They did way better. Yeah, it was a big difference.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It is, yeah.
So it seems like combining those two approaches could be like a really potent recipe for deeper learning and engagement in math.
Absolutely. And it's not just about test scores.
Right.
The flipped RME group also showed an increase in what we call math self-efficacy.
Math self-efficacy.
Yeah, so basically that just means how confident they feel in their math abilities.
Oh, okay.
And they also showed a stronger tendency towards critical thinking.
So it's not just about getting the right answers. It's about feeling confident in your ability to tackle those math problems and thinking critically about the process.
Exactly.
Wow, that's huge.
It is, yeah. It's like a really well-rounded approach to math education.
So to really bring this point home,
Okay.
I actually wanted to share a quote from one of the students who participated in the study.
Yeah.
They said, "In the previous instructional approach, we lacked the opportunity to collaborate and interact with peers to share our ideas and with the teacher to get feedback because the majority of the time was used for the lecture.
Right.
In the FLRME, we discussed in a group and presented the results of our discussion to the whole class and got feedback from the teacher, which enhanced my performance."
Wow.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, this student is basically saying that that flipped classroom created this more dynamic and engaging learning environment where they actually felt empowered to participate and collaborate.
Exactly. They were really taking ownership over their learning.
And really owning their learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key takeaway here. You know, it's not just about the content, it's also about creating a learning experience where students feel valued and supported and inspired to really explore their potential.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So what do you think about this approach? Do you think this could be the future of math education? Could we be on the verge of a world where math class is actually, dare I say it, enjoyable?
I mean, it's certainly a step in the right direction, and it addresses a lot of the common complaints that we hear about traditional math education.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know, I'm kind of excited to see where this research goes and what other possibilities it might open up.
Me too, me too. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
All right, so we've talked about flipped classrooms. We've talked about realistic mathematics education. We've seen how they can work together to improve student learning. But now I want to dig a little deeper into some of the specific findings of this study,
Okay, sounds good.
because there's a lot more to uncover here. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break. So we've talked about flipped classrooms. We've talked about realistic mathematics education. We've seen how they can work together to improve student learning. But now I want to dig a little deeper into some of the specific findings of this study,
Okay, sounds good.
because there's a lot more to uncover here.
Yeah, there is.
Like, one of the things that really stood out to me was this idea of critical thinking.
Yes.
You know, this study found that flipped RME actually led to a significant increase in students' critical thinking skills.
Absolutely.
But, you know, critical thinking, it's kind of like a superpower. You can't really see it happening. You just see the results.
Right. It's not like there's a little light bulb that goes off above their heads when they're thinking critically.
Exactly. So how do we actually know that students are thinking more critically?
Well, in this study, they used a special questionnaire that's designed to measure students' tendency toward critical thinking.
Okay.
So it looks at things like, are they willing to consider different viewpoints?
Uh-huh.
Are they analyzing information carefully?
Right.
Are they drawing their own conclusions?
So it's not just about memorizing formulas and following steps. It's about really understanding the why behind the math.
Exactly. It's about thinking for yourself.
And I bet some people out there are thinking, wait a minute, isn't math all about finding the right answer? Where does all this like touchy-feely critical thinking stuff fit in?
Yeah, that's a really common misconception about math.
Okay.
People think it's just about getting the right answer, but it's so much more than that.
Right.
It's about problem solving.
Uh-huh.
It's about logical reasoning. It's about making connections between different concepts. And all of that requires critical thinking.
It's like, learning to ride a bike.
Okay.
You don't just magically hop on and, pedal off into the sunset.
Right.
You have to understand how the bike works.
Right. You have to problem solve.
You have to practice.
You have to think about balance.
You have to think about how to steer. There's a lot of critical thinking that goes into mastering those two wheels.
I love that analogy. Yeah. And, the cool thing about critical thinking is that it's a skill that you can use in any area of your life.
Right. It's not just math.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So whether you're, writing an essay or debating a topic or even just making a decision, critical thinking can help you approach it in a more thoughtful and informed way.
Okay, so we've got the critical thinking piece, but this study also looked at something called math self-efficacy,
Yes.
which sounds like a fancy term for confidence.
It is a fancy term for confidence.
So basically, how much a student believes in their own ability to do math.
Exactly. And you know what they found?
Right.
The students in the flipped RME group had a much higher level of math self-efficacy compared to the traditional RME group.
Oh, wow. So not only are they learning more and thinking more critically, but they're also feeling more confident about their abilities.
Exactly. It's like a win-win-win situation.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it makes sense, right? I mean, when you feel confident about something, you're more likely to stick with it even when it gets tough.
Totally.
And you're more likely to take risks and try new things.
Absolutely. And, math can be a really challenging subject for a lot of students. So having that confidence can make a huge difference.
So what do you think are some of the key takeaways from this study for teachers who are maybe looking to implement some of these approaches in their own classrooms?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that it's not just about putting your lectures online and calling it a day.
Right.
Flipped learning and realistic mathematics education, they require a lot of careful planning.
Yes.
And a deep understanding of how students learn.
So it's really about creating those engaging learning experiences that we were talking about.
Exactly. And finding ways to connect the math to the real world and making sure that students are actively participating and thinking critically.
So it's not just about making math class more bearable. It's really about transforming the whole learning experience.
I think so.
One of the things that I think is so cool about this study is that it shows how powerful it can be to give students more ownership over their learning.
Right.
In the traditional classroom, it's often like the teacher is the holder of all the knowledge.
A sage on the stage.
Yes, exactly. And the students are just passively absorbing information.
Right.
But in this flipped RME model, it's like the students are becoming active participants in their own learning.
They're driving the bus.
Yeah, exactly. And they're getting to explore and experiment and discover things for themselves.
And that can be so much more engaging and motivating.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I just want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
This study focused on math education in Ethiopia, but the lessons we've uncovered, I think they have applications far beyond the math classroom.
Absolutely.
No matter what you're learning, whether it's math or history or science or even just life skills, the principles of active learning, collaboration, and connecting to real-world applications,
Right.
they can make a huge difference.
It can.
So if you're a teacher or a student or just someone who's passionate about learning, I encourage you to take these ideas and see how you can apply them to your own life.
That's great advice.
And who knows, maybe you'll even discover a newfound love for math along the way.
You never know.
I think it's safe to say that math kind of has like a PR problem.
It does.
It's often seen as this dry and intimidating subject, and only a select few can really wrap their heads around it.
Right. It's like the gatekeeper to higher education.
Yeah, exactly. But this study, I think, really challenges that perception.
It does.
Maybe we've been approaching math all wrong.
Yeah, maybe instead of focusing on memorizing formulas and just procedures, what if we focused more on real-world applications and collaboration and, actually getting students to think critically.
And seeing the beauty and the power of math,
Absolutely.
instead of just the fear factor.
It's like the difference between reading a textbook about music theory versus actually playing an instrument and jamming with your friends and creating something beautiful.
Yes.
One is all about the rules and the formulas, and the other one is about experiencing the joy and the creativity of music.
I love that analogy, and I think that's a key takeaway here.
Yeah.
This study isn't just about math.
Right.
It's really about reimagining the entire learning experience.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to kind of bring it back to you, our listener.
Okay.
What can you take away from this research? What can you apply to your own life, even if you're not a math person or even a student anymore?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Just because something's been done a certain way for a long time doesn't mean that's the best way to do it.
Right. Be open to new approaches.
Exactly.
And ways of thinking.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the power of connecting what you're learning to the real world.
Yes.
Whether you're studying math or history or science or anything, always ask yourself, how does this relate to my life?
Right. How can I use this information?
Just how can I actually apply this to the world around me?
Yeah, and don't forget the importance of collaboration and critical thinking.
Right. Find people who challenge you and inspire you to think differently.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions and dig deeper.
Exactly.
So, this study focused on math education in Ethiopia, but I think the lessons that we've uncovered here have universal applications.
They do.
No matter where you are in your learning journey,
Right.
remember to stay curious and stay engaged and just never stop exploring.
Never stop learning.
Never stop learning. That's right. So keep those brains buzzing, stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Sounds good.
Until then, happy learning.